Today we get to sit down with the founding pastor of Hope Church Memphis, Dr. Craig Strickland. In this episode, Pastor Craig gets practical and personal on some massive risks he has taken throughout his career. From planting Hope Church almost 32 years ago, which is crazy, to electing female elders, to implementing a succession plan for an African American pastor to lead a predominantly white congregation. Lots of risk was involved. Craig offers us some great advice and wisdom on how to take big risks. So let's get to it and meet Pastor Craig Strickland in the green chair. Pastor Craig.
Hey.
Thank you so much for being here in the green chair.
My pleasure.
This is a huge honor. So 32 years of Hope this month, right? 32 years?
That sounds about right.
Okay, don't make me do math on camera. No, 32 years this month. And just as I'm thinking through celebrating Hope's anniversary, thinking through kind of all we've been through, I can't help but think about, number one, you, and number two, taking risks. You have taken some massive risks throughout your career. And I kind of want to get into a few of those, specifically 3 of them.
Okay.
But we got to start with planting Hope.
Okay.
Like, how in the world, like, you had a job at another church in town and you decide, I'm going to plant this church?
Yeah. I'd been at our mother church, the Second Presbyterian, for 10 years, and I felt like it was time for a change, and I felt like I wanted to be a senior pastor somewhere, but the problem was nobody really was wanting me. And so I said, well, why don't I start a church? Back in '88 when we started, that was a pretty new field. There weren't many people doing it, and I decided that was the route I wanted to go. And so I approached the senior pastor, good dear friend Dick DeWitt, who's subsequently passed away, but Dick was a great mentor for me, and time came for me to leave, and I said, Dick, I feel called to start a church. And Second has a long history of starting churches. Would you be willing to go to the leadership and see if you all would back me? And he said, I'll have to think about it. And I said, great. He comes back and says, no, I'm not going to do it. I said, okay, all right, would you mind pulling together a little larger group of leaders and asking them? And he said, yeah, I'll do that. And he comes back and he says, they said no. I think I went to him a total of 3 times, and he said no every time. You know, wow. Finally, it was kind of like, what part of no do you not understand? And so I was determined. I just felt like God was saying I needed to start a church. And so I actually had 2 thoughts. I thought, well, first of all, I don't know how to start a church. I don't know anything about starting churches. So I'd have to learn that.
Okay. And
then secondly, I would need the financial backing to pay my salary and expenses for the first 3 years. So I began praying that God would show me both of those things, where the money was and how to do it. And Lee was right there with me all the way throughout it, and willing to follow me anywhere. And so I heard about this church planting conference. And there were not many of these, 1 or 2 a year maybe, and this one was a huge one. Most conferences back in those days for churches were at hotels that were under construction or renovation, so they could get it cheap. And we all used to roll our eyes every time we went to a convention for that reason.
Yeah.
And I went back to Dick and said, do you think that Second would be open? I know you don't want to plant a church, but would you be open to paying for me to go to this conference? He said, no, well, I won't. And I said, okay, well, I've got the vacation time coming. I'm gonna take vacation time and go. And we didn't really have any money to speak of, and so I thought I'll just put it on a credit card. Not a great. I'm not advocating that. You understand? And so I went to this conference, and God has such a great sense of humor. The conference was at a 5-star hotel, like $400 a night. I didn't even have enough money to rent a car, but I thought, what do I need a car for? There'll be restaurants all around hotels.
Yeah.
This hotel's in the middle of nowhere, so it's like 2 or 3 miles to the closest restaurant. So, but there was a 7-Eleven next door, and so I would go over there and get my meals. And every day at lunch, this was a 5-day conference, and every day at lunch, I'd go back to my room and eat my cheese and crackers, and then I'd spend the rest of that hour praying. And I did something that I don't often do, but I sometimes do. I'd get on my knees, and I'd talk to God, and I'd ask Him for these 2 things. I'd say, show me how to plant a church, and show me how I'm going to fund it. And then my promise to you is I will turn in my resignation that day. And I prayed that every day. And by the end of this conference, it was a fabulous conference. And I realized that I had the knowledge base to plant the church. So that day at lunch, I'm praying on my knees, and I'm thanking God at this point, and I thank Him for giving me the knowledge. And I said, I'm going home to resign. And I got up and I said amen and got up and started down the hallway. And I found myself without any peace about that decision at all, which made me mad. I got mad. You ever been mad at God?
Yeah.
I got mad at God. And I turned around and went back to my room, got back, walked in the door. I didn't even have time to get on my knees. I shut the door.
That's how mad you were.
Yeah.
You're just like, I'm going back in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really slammed the door and did like this and said, God, what's up? And immediately I knew what the problem was. The problem was me. I wasn't willing to sell our house and live off the equity in our house to start this church. I didn't believe in it enough. So I said, just immediately I knew I was the problem. And so I said, okay, God, I get it. If that's what you want me to do, that's what I'll do. And I turned around and walked back out of the room, and I was at total peace. You ever prayed to God and you walk away and you feel a total peace about it?
Yeah.
That's the way it felt. It wasn't that I knew exactly how it was going to work out. I was just totally at peace about it.
Yeah.
So I walked down this was a huge conference, thousands of people, and I end up on the escalator, and I get to the bottom of the escalator, and I see a consultant that we had hired at Second Pres. And he'd been there several times. I knew him well. And I hadn't seen him all week. He was one of the keynote speakers, but I hadn't seen him. And he says, Craig, I've been looking for you. And I said, how's that? And he says, has the conference been good for you? And I went, it's been fantastic. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going home to resign and plant a church. And he said, that's great. Second's is going to plant this church. And I went, no, they don't want any part of it. And so I'm going to do it anyway. And he said, no, you don't want to do that. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I'm going to be at Second in a few weeks. You need to wait until I've been there, and they'll change their mind. And after they change their mind, if your replacement's on board by January, then you start the church at Easter. If not, then wait till the fall and start it then. Now, I got to go speak. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. I very few times have I felt like God just kind of showed up and hit me with a 2x4. That was the time.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. And Second ended up supporting us for the first 3 years. It was a phenomenal commitment that they had.
That's really crazy.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, so that's a huge risk.
Yeah.
Right? Like you literally said you're getting ready to resign. You're getting ready, like you're putting it all on the line for this. And another massive risk, I am personally indebted to you. I was actually thinking of this conversation, and I don't even know if you remember this or not, but I started the whole ordination process sitting in your office. I'm terrified out of my mind. I'm nervous, like I can't believe this. And I sit down in your office and I'm like, so I think I'm supposed to be ordained. So women in ministry, that was another big shift for Hope Church, specifically women elders.
Yes.
And that was kind of something you paved long before I ever came along.
Yeah. The denomination that we're in gives churches the freedom to either have women in leadership or not. And second, has a pretty strong position that they do not have women elders or ministers. And so I didn't want to come out of the gate disagreeing with them or agreeing with them. I thought we were young, we needed a chance to think about it, pray about it, live together, and after about a year, I put a committee together of people that were pro-women in leadership and anti-women in leadership, 50-50 split, and said, you all spend a year studying it and come back with a recommendation. A year later, they came back, split right where they were when they started. So by then, we needed to have elders and deacons. We had some elders, they were all men. And some of those men were in favor of women elders and others weren't. So ultimately, I felt like the honorable thing to do was to put a slate together that had enough men on it that the congregation could elect all men, but it at least have one or two women on, so if the congregation wanted to elect a woman, they could. But nobody's forced into a decision. And long story for reasons not worth going into, some on the session vetoed that at the 11th hour, and I had to wait another year before I could put that on the agenda, and I almost quit that year. And my mentor, Frank Norfleet, talked me out of it. He said, you don't ever make big decisions in crisis, so you wait a year. And he said, it's going to take a year. And it did. He was right. A year later, we came back and did that very thing, put one woman on the session, on the ballot, and enough men that you could elect all men, and she was overwhelmingly elected. Wow. And half of the session left, one at a time over 6 months after her election. So it was a painful time in the church, although each of those men left well. It just was like a slow hemorrhage for 6 months. In fact, when in the middle of it, the finance committee had came to me and said, we're not going to have enough money in the budget to pay for your latest hire, which was Mike Moses. He was our second minister on staff here. And he'd been here maybe 3 months, moved from California. And they said, you're going to have to let him go after the first of the year. If the funding doesn't pick up, all these guys left, took their money with them. And so you're going to have to let him go. And I said, no, I'm not willing to do that. I don't think that's the moral answer to this problem. You tell me how much money you need, and all of us will take cuts in salary to get to that number. And if I have to work part-time and Eli has to work part-time and Mike, we'll do it if that's what it calls for. And right after the meeting, I called both of them in and I said, I don't know what you're doing, but drop it, because we've got about 5 months to grow the church or we all got to take a cut in salary. Wow. And by God's grace, we ended the year in the black, not by a lot, but in the black. And nobody took cuts, nobody had to. And it was another one of those really faith risking times in our lives.
Yeah, that was a big step.
Yeah.
And okay, so your succession plan, fast forward, your succession plan involved an African American pastor overseeing a predominantly white Caucasian church.
Yeah.
How did you land there?
Yeah, that sounds a little crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's amazing.
Yeah.
And risky.
Yeah, it was the kind of thing that at some point the leadership looked up and said, churches with founding pastors that leave or retire or die or do something stupid almost always fall off the cliff in attendance and membership, and it takes a decade to recover. And they knew that, smart people, and they said, would you put together a succession plan where that doesn't happen at Hope? and take as long as you want. No, we're not trying to send a message here to you that we don't want you. We want you absolutely. We just
Want to plan.
we want to plan.
Yeah.
So I said, sure. And so I took about 6 months and studied it and looked around the country at what other people were doing, and it confirmed exactly what their thoughts were. We were going to fail big time if we didn't have a plan. And so after about 6 months, I came back to them and said, okay, here's what I think we should do. I think we should hire my replacement now, and I think we should have a 2 to 5 year window where for a couple of years, whoever we hire learns Hope's culture, learns how to preach the way we preach, becomes comfortable here, and when we're all convinced this person has everything that it takes and is ready to make that move, then we'll just gently transfer authority and power to him. Or it could have been her. And although I probably would have lost that battle at the time.
Yeah.
But they said, that sounds great. That sounds like a great plan. I said, one other thing, he needs to be African American. And they went, you could see by the person, they looked like a deer standing, deer in the headlamps. And they said, why? I said, we've built our success in ministry at Hope on being a community church, a church for anybody in our community to come. And they've come in large numbers, thanks to the grace of God. And I said, in the 25 years that we have been here, our community has evolved. It was at one time almost 100% white.
Yeah.
And now it is, I don't know, 75% African American, Asian, Latino, whatever, mostly African American, and a very small percentage white. So we got two choices. I mean, we can sell this huge facility we've spent 25 years sacrificing to build and move on out east like many churches did, or we could stay and do ministry in our community like we said we were going to do. And but in order to do that, we need to be ministering to the whole community. And the only way that makes sense is an African American leading our congregation. I've said many times over our decades here that racial reconciliation is not the problem of government. It's not the problem of industry, business. And they shouldn't be held accountable for leading the way in making racial change. The church should. If the church is about anything, it's about reconciliation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I said we could be an example for our entire community, for the country, of churches that were willing to take a risk like that in order to do the right thing. And I said, y'all think about it, pray about it. In a month or two, we'll come back together and talk about it again. And they came back, and to the person, they said, you're right, right, that's what we need to do. And I had known Rufus and been a friend of Rufus's for 10 years, 20 years, and reached out to him right away. And of course, he loves to tell the story that I asked him to pray about it, and he wouldn't do it. And after my hounding him for the better part of a year or so, he finally said, well, I'll come look. And God moved in his heart, and I think it's been a great move.
Yeah, and that's what I really admire that about you and Hope. I mean, from the beginning, you wanted to be like a neighborhood church, right? It wasn't just about, you wanted us to look like the neighborhood, be involved in the neighborhood, very community-based, and I really respect that. I really do. So those are really bold moves, and you knew at each point, particularly like you're not going to make everybody happy, and I think you're a little more comfortable with that than I am. But you knew you weren't going to make everybody happy. You knew some people were probably going to leave on each of those.
Yeah.
So what was the driving force behind those decisions, behind those risks that you took?
Well, I got comfortable with people being critical when we started using comment cards and asking people to fill them out, which is much like giving everybody a gun and saying, shoot me with it if you'd like. And so having been shot at a lot over the years, I developed a pretty thick skin. But what has driven me through the years at every turn, the big risks that we took and the small risks that we took, was the belief that if you do the right thing, it'll work out. And it doesn't matter to me whether the right thing is something somebody else disagrees with me about. Racial reconciliation is the right thing. I don't care who you are, it's the right thing. And if you have to leave over that, God bless you. I'm sure there's a place you can go.
Yeah.
And so I have tried to figure out from my perspective before God what the right thing was, and then do it. And I'm sure I didn't always get that right, but it has certainly been a driving force in my life from the very beginning, and it is today. I'm nothing but a blue-collar shop owner today, small shop owner at that, but doing the right thing is still important.
Yeah.
Maybe the most important.
Yeah, and I love that. That's kind of like your leadership mantra, right? Like you said, just do the right thing. And in a sense, that's so simple. Like I feel like there's leadership books and there's all of these things that really overcomplicate it. But at the end of the day, it really is as simple as if we just do the right thing, if we do what we know God is doing. And I love that you say too, like God will take care of the details. Like you just say, God will cover that. You just got to do what you know you got to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really.
Yeah. And that's hard to do a lot of times.
Yeah.
And particularly when people aren't doing the right thing and you're having to live with their wrath, doesn't allow you to stop and say, well, then I'm going to get down in the ditch and sling mud with them. It's saying, what would Jesus do here? He'd do the right thing. And so in spite of what kind of criticism's coming or whatever, I'm going to concentrate on doing the right thing.
So looking back, right, 32-ish years, so you're here now, all this life experience, all of these risks you've taken, all of these bold moves that you've taken. What would you have told yourself 30-ish years ago?
I would have told myself this is going to be way harder than you think it's going to be. Because man, I thought I could roll out of the boat and hit water. And it was way harder than I thought. I don't consider myself a church planter. I consider myself a church founder.
Okay.
I don't think I'd do this again. It's too hard. And I had no clue how hard it would be. And I think that's part of God's plan too. It's been His way of keeping me grounded over the years. If I don't listen real carefully to Him, then I'll get a baseball bat in the back of the head, and I'll get up and go, "What was that?" And that's part of my drive to do the right thing. I don't like getting hit in the head, and so if I don't learn it the first time, I usually learn it the second time.
And so I always like to land in like a practical place with this. And so for any practical advice, encouragement, wisdom you'd like to share for maybe those of us on the verge of taking risks or knowing we need to take some risk or knowing, I like how you said, to do the right thing. We know we need to do that. Any advice, wisdom you'd give us?
Yeah, there are a couple of things, particularly at our point in time as a nation right now with COVID really driving everyone's agenda and informing everything that we do. There are a couple of guiding principles I think that are important. One's do the right thing.
Yeah.
The second is make sure you keep the main thing, which is to say, be focused.
Yeah.
And I've always described that as a laser-like focus on what it is you're called to do. And you may not be called to start a church. You may be called to start a plumbing company. Doesn't matter. If it's God's calling, then you need to be laser-focused on that calling. And then the third thing I like to call the art of the pivot.
Yes.
I think that when you get in a situation that's not working, the smart thing to do is pivot. Is to say, okay, this is not working. And a lot of times we're tempted to do the same thing over and over, even though we get the same results, which we've all heard that. It's the definition of insanity.
Yes.
I love the way my son-in-law approaches building things, and I've learned a lot from him, but he says, I'll try something one way twice, and if by the second time I haven't succeeded, then I change it in some way. So I'm not doing the same thing over and over. And in life, I think there are a lot of ways to do things. And so if one way is not working, I think it's time to pivot and say, okay, that doesn't work. Let's try something else. And we've done that as a church for almost 35 years. I do it today in this little woodworking shop that I started. When we look up and go, okay, that didn't work, well, then we pivot. Now, it's interesting, I posted something about that on Facebook, and somebody came back and said, if you pivot all the time, you'll end up going in circles.
Huh.
And that's true. That is true.
Huh.
However, if you keep the main thing, then you shouldn't lose focus, and you shouldn't be going in circles. So at the end of the day, is this new venture that I'm involved in, will it be successful? I have no idea. It's like planting a church. I can't predict.
Yeah.
I had no idea Hope would be what it is today. But if I tried to do the right thing and keep the main thing, and be willing to pivot when I needed to, I felt like God would take care of the details. Now, would it be a success? Well, by whose standards?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Ultimately, by God's standards. That's the only thing that matters. And that's true in this new venture, too. Will it be a success? I don't have any idea. I know that I work really hard. I know it's not easy. But look, stuff that's easy, anybody could do.
Yeah.
You know, the hard things in life are just that. They're hard. And so...
Well, thank you so much for being here with us. We really
My pleasure.
appreciate you being here. And that is a wrap for our Green Chair conversation with Pastor Craig Strickland. Thank you so much for being connected with us today. Don't forget, you can share today's conversation with a friend or even post on your social media platforms. If you're interested in connecting further or getting additional resources to take this conversation beyond the chair, you can email me at greenchair@hopechurchmemphis.com. Love you guys. See you next week.